Dr. Lynette Reed is our speaker. She is at the ready with headphones on.
That's right.
She is a people and culture partner and an executive coach. She is not in costume, but it's quite all right.
So, yeah, I didn't get the
She didn't know what this group was all about.
Yeah.
Okay. So here's her wonderful bio. She is a writer, researcher, and advisor on human potential for personal and organizational development. She is a people and culture partner. She has mentored people from businesses, not-for-profits, schools, allied health agencies, chambers of commerce, governments, and churches. She has taught courses on team building, leadership, ethics, world religion, and world cultures. Her current literary contributions include an executive summary paperback titled Fixing the Problem, Making Changes in How You Deal with Challenges, as well as book contributions, articles, guest radio appearances, and a series of children's books with Abingdon Press. She is also a co-founder and board member of the Institute for Soul-Centered Leadership at Seton Cove. She holds a Doctor of Ministry in Spirituality, Sustainability, and Interreligious Dialogue. I don't know that all fits on her diploma.
No.
And a Master of Science in Communication Sciences and Disorders. Communication Sciences and Disorders. I would like an explanation. I hope you can fit that into your presentation.
Sure. Yeah, I'll start, I'll say it's all kind of random sounding.
Okay, we need you to explain that
There's
to
a
us.
story there, yeah.
And she says you can contact her at expectations. I bet she's going to have this on her PowerPoint. Expectations, and then the number 2, reality, at iCloud.com. With no more delays, let's hear from Dr. Lynette Reed.
Hi, how's everybody doing today? Well, just to kind of give you a little bit of background, I started in actually speech pathology, which is what the degree was, communication sciences and disorders. But a lot of the work that I did with that was, how do you communicate effectively? How do you, interact with people in ways that make it so that people can talk to each other in ways that they're going to be more effective. And so it kind of started there. And then I went on to get a very obscure doctorate in spirituality, sustainability, and interreligious dialogue, which was really kind of what I would call a world peace degree. One of my professors was actually affiliated with the World Peace Council. And so I thought, okay, how do you take all of this and turn it into something that's usable in today's society? So I started actually working with a couple of people I knew who were in the mortgage company and title company businesses. And we were talking about spirituality. And, a lot of times whenever you're thinking spirituality, you're thinking either my experience has been, especially in the past, was either religion or crystals. It goes both ways. But for me, when I look at spirituality, basically what it is for me is how do you connect to yourself, to other people, and the world. And so when you look at the root of spirit, it's breath. So basically with every breath you take, you get to decide how you're going to live your life and how you're going to do things. And the other part of it is inspire. So you've got inspire and breath as your core sense of how you're going to structure and build something. And so you can apply this to pretty much any topic that you want to, discuss as far as society or how you're going to interact or communicate with each other. And so that's kind of the rough story of how it all started. But then what I started doing was going in and working with companies and doing programs. When I was working on my doctorate, I actually came up with a process. It's a 3-part process. And these were 3 behaviors that I saw over and over again that helped people to communicate more effectively or feel better about themselves or to really think in terms of the broader picture. And that turned into stories about, how do you use this for critical thinking skills? How do you use this for, in regards to binary thinking? How does it fit in with society, with all of our artificial intelligence and machine learning that's coming up? It's getting faster and faster, and there's just so many changes going on. How do we keep that core sense of ourselves as things are changing. And so that's kind of the broad picture. And so now I'm going to kind of whittle it down to where we are today, where we've got a lot of a lot of people out of work looking for jobs. With COVID, remote work is becoming a new thing. And so we have to really change the entire way that we view the world and ourselves and the work that we're doing. And so if you're out there, I actually did this presentation a couple of weeks ago for an organization that works a lot with project managers. And so what we were kind of talking about was, how do you as an employer look for somebody who's going to be a really good fit, and how do you as an employee find ways to become better prepared and really figure out how to do your job search and your career? Because to me, when I'm looking at that, I'm thinking to myself, how do we motivate ourselves? You know, what's our motivation behind what we're doing? And that's kind of where we're going to start today. I have a PowerPoint that I can share if anybody wants it, but I'm just going to kind of go through it on my own, since I'm not going to really do the screen share today. But if you want a copy of it, or if you want to take a look at it, it's actually on my LinkedIn page. So as I'm going along, if you have any questions or you want to see any of the information, you can look on my LinkedIn page. Okay, so Career Builders said that 3 out of 4 employers stated that they had hired the wrong person for a position. And on average, companies spend about $14,000, $15,000 annually for every mismatched hire. So think about how much money and efficiency a company loses by not really putting a lot of time and effort into who they're going to pick as their employer or employee. And then think about it from the other perspective, how much time and energy, if you're an employee looking for a job, how much time you're spending if you look, you know, for just a job because you want to get paid, and then you get in and you don't like your job and you end up having to change jobs, or, you know, something happens and you're on the other end of that. So, you know, we're talking that, you know, hundreds of thousands of millions possibly of dollars that are being wasted in companies and in time for people, whether you're an employer or an employee. So just kind of a number to think of as you're going through that, okay? And right now, I think on average, every corporate role gets about 250 online applications. And that's a pretty big rate, and that's a lot of it's due to automation and the internet. If you've been on LinkedIn recently looking for a job, they have the button you can push that's the easy apply button. And so, you know, if you think about that, you know, it's getting faster and more efficient and things like that. But that means more people can apply for the jobs. And when we're in a situation like we're in right now with COVID, where a lot of jobs are being gotten rid of, or people are losing their jobs or being furloughed, that's once again, you know, time and energy that's really going to certain things that they did not have to go to, just because we can apply so much faster. It's not like the old days whenever I first started doing it, you know, where you had to type out your resume, and if you had to use the whiteout. I don't know how many of you all are old enough to remember that, but you'd have a typewriter, and if you made a mistake, you had to white it out and retype it. And, you know, now you just get online and, you know, my resume is on my LinkedIn page. So literally you can go and look at it from that perspective. So, you know, that's kind of staggering when you think about, you know, you got to go out and look for a job, and, you know, what do we want to do? And so I think a lot of times what I hear is, especially if you don't have a job and you're looking for one, is you have to have the realistic perception of, oh my gosh, I need a job, I need to pay the bills. But then there's another layer to that, I think, that what I like to say is your motivation for it. Because if your only motivation is to get a job, then, you know, input in, input out, think of it as a binary thing. If you go into something a certain way, then you're going to probably get the output of what you're putting into it. So even if you're looking for a job, or if you're an employer, who is trying to find somebody, don't think of it as just that rote, okay, I got to find somebody to fill this position, or, oh, I just need a job. Because the minute you do that, what have you really kind of set yourself up for? You kind of set yourself up to be that statistic that's out there, where you get a job, maybe in it for the honeymoon period, and then all of a sudden 6 months later you're like, oh my gosh, why did I pick this job? And then you get in that kind of vicious cycle. Or if you're an employer and you pick somebody, it's like, oh my gosh, this person really doesn't match, now what do I do? So I really encourage people, and I do believe that interviewing process is definitely a two-way street, especially now more than ever. I think that the people, when you're looking to find a job, you should be interviewing the company as much as they're interviewing you, because if you can find that perfect fit, it really does make a difference in your efficiency, your quote unquote happiness level, how motivated you are, how efficient you are. So if, take that extra time to think, okay, what is my motivation going into this? Obviously I need a job, but also, what am I looking for? What do I want it to look like? Okay. And that's kind of where you should always start that. Okay. Because I believe that any successful job interview starts with the proper motivation. You have to really know what you like to do, what you don't like to do, and things like that. The other thing I find with job interviews, and like I said, everything I'm talking about is for both employers who are looking to hire and employees who are looking to find a job. So everything I'm saying here applies both ways, because you're both really kind of doing this interview process together. Okay. First thing I tend to do is break it down into two parts. There's your technical skills, which is, are you qualified for the job? Do you have the skills that you need? Are you able to do the things that they need you to do? And I kind of came up with a list of questions that are ones that I've heard quite a few people use in order to get kind of down to the meat of who you're looking for. And so I'm just going to kind of read them off. And what I'm going to encourage you to do is, just while I'm reading them off, is just think to yourself, if you're in this process right now, or if you're an HR person, how does this fit into what you're doing now, but then also what you want it to look like whenever you're trying to put something together? Because I do think HR people have a really challenging job, in that they have to know a lot of the administrative work, but then they also have to try to be the advocate somewhere in there for either the company or the people. And it's a very challenging thing to have to try to juggle all of that and still keep going with the realities of the day. So just kind of, take a few moments before you go into the interview to really think of this out. Do your homework, really make sure that you are prepared for where you're going, because if you go into the interview and you're efficient in the interview, and you know where you're going, then that's going to make you seem and feel more prepared either side. Okay, so what skill sets are needed for the job? That's always a really good question. When you're looking at jobs, do you have the jobs, the skills they need? How proficient does the employee need to be at specific job skills? Is training an option? Sometimes the best employees are ones that you really like for other reasons, but they may not have the exact skill sets. And so, it may be that training is an option. And that's something, if you're an employee looking for a job, if you see a job you really like, and you don't have all the skills, address that in your cover letter to say, I recognize I don't have this specific skill, but I'm willing to learn it. Because then you might find a job that you really like that kind of fits into things you're interested in. Can the employee and team explain the technical aspects of the job? So one of the things I find a lot of times is if you're doing a job interview and the employer is telling you, yeah, this is a great job, you're going to love it, the people here work really well together. It's really easy to say that, but you have to kind of figure out a way to make sure they know how to do, how that works for their team. And so one of the things I suggest people ask is, can the employee and team explain the technical aspects of the job? So usually if you're making it through the interview process, when you get to meet some of the employees that are already working there, just kind of ask them, what are these technical aspects, and see if they're able to really describe it to you, especially things like one of the big things I've actually found is chain of command. It doesn't seem like it's a real big deal whenever you're talking about technical aspects, but when you're looking at, how are you going to interact? How are you going to connect with the people around you in the job? It's very helpful if you know, okay, this person, this is how this team works. These people go to this person, and make sure you don't see it where two people are your boss. Because I don't know how many of you have ever had that situation, but whenever you have that kind of triangulation where you're going to be answering to two bosses, that can be a real challenge, especially if those two bosses don't get along or if one of them moves and another one comes in. So, kind of just talk and have them explain what they're doing, what their jobs are right now, and how they are putting, what process are they going through. And I think that helps the employee get a really good idea of what they're walking into. And for employers, it's good because then you can see, okay, well, how would you handle this situation? You could show it to them from the perspective of, here's a problem we're having. And, a lot of people may already be doing this, but sometimes it's nice to hear it because then it reinforces where you're at also. So just kind of be thinking about these things as you're doing it. Some people even put together a checklist of these things, not to mandate it, but to just say, okay, I want to remember to ask about these things because this is going to set up what this person is going to do technically in this job, and for the employee, it's going to set up it's going to look like the day they walk in. They're going to know, okay, this is going to be my boss. This is going to be the team that I'm working with. And if they don't have a really clear picture of that, imagine how chaotic it might be when you're working in that. So that's a good way to kind of assess their technical knowledge, how you might fit into it. Do some people have strengths that you don't have that might complement yours? Okay. And then do the assessment tools match what you want to assess? A lot of people are using assessment tools right now to kind of assess technical skills. And I think the biggest challenge with that, although they can be very useful, is making sure that you don't just look at the score or what it's telling you, but look a little bit deeper into it, because sometimes the test that you're giving may not really assess what you're wanting it to assess. And so make sure you have a really clear picture of that. And, and I think most people have a pretty good grasp on this part of the interviewing process. It's, it's pretty technical. It's very physical. You can see it, you can feel it. I think the area that I tend to do most of my work in, which is how the connectivity of people, is what some people call soft skills, or that kind of elusive layer at the bottom that's how we behave and how we treat people. And if you think about your job you're in now, or where you are right now as far as an employer, employee, think about for just a moment the people that make your life work much more effectively and efficiently, and what you notice about them and how they respond and treat people and act, and the way that other people do. The ones that are less efficient and tend to, make it a little more of a challenge. For those of you who have had a job where one person has pretty much broken the team, which I've heard that happen a lot, you can start to really feel how incredibly important these soft skills are. And when I'm looking at it, what I'm thinking is, okay, if something's fracturing, it's going to ultimately break. And that goes back to those statistics that Career Builder was talking about, where 3 out of 4, well, 9 times out of 10, I would guess that the predominant problem is personality conflicts, people who won't admit that they don't know how to do something, somebody who just wants to show that they can do it, but they're not really able to. There's just these fractures in what we're saying and what we're doing. And so these soft skills, I think, play a really important role in the interview process. When you're looking at the interview process, you really want to kind of dig into not only the company, but the people that work at the company, and if you're an employer looking for somebody, what the value system is and what the the belief structures are for this person. The way I use the example I usually use, I've got two. So one is the tree. For those nature lovers out there, that if you think about a tree, the company is the trunk and all the branches, employees, and the leaves, and that's all the stuff you see and you do on a day-to-day basis. That's your technical skills, the company you're working at, things like that, the brand. But then underneath, that's holding the tree down and holding it in place, are the roots. And if you have really weak roots, that tree's not going to thrive. It can survive, but it may be weak and the wind can blow it over. And the way that the roots work is going to determine how strong the tree is. And that's kind of, to me, what soft skills are, is the roots of the company, the roots of the person, the roots of each individual are going to decide what that company looks like. And so the stronger each one of your employees are in their ability to think broadly, to be able to behave and work in a way that is more effective, is going to really change the way that you do business. And for employees looking at employers, it's kind of the same thing. If you're an employee looking for a job and you want something that's going to really help you to make a, kind of make a difference in what you're signing up for, look at how people treat each other. How do what are ways that they do things? And so that's the one I want to talk about a little bit more, because that's really more my area of skill set. And it's kind of hard to talk a lot for me about the technical stuff, because each company is so very different in the technical needs of the job, the technical needs of the person. Those types of things are very individual to the company. What I find, though, with soft skills is every single person and every single company can benefit from it. There's actually been a couple of books written on it. And one of the things they say is that people create the DNA of the company. And the way I interpret that is that when you look at a company, it's kind of a fluid thing. People come, people go. When one person comes in who's really efficient and effective, it changes the dynamic of that entire company and that entire team. If you get somebody who isn't happy to be there and is hostile, that changes the DNA of the company. And so the success of your company is going to be created by what culture you have and how people are responding to each other. And the way I think of it for employees is, it doesn't have to be, happy, friendly. Some people work much better if they can put their head down, be efficient, and they don't really have to talk to anybody. Some people like to talk. They like to go out and meet other people, see what they're doing, find out what's happening. And there's really not, in my opinion, a wrong way to do things. It's trying to find that right match for the way you are and your culture. I've seen people who are highly, highly technically skilled who go into one job and they are miserable because the people that work around them don't work the way they do. And neither one of them are wrong about it. It's just they work differently. And you take that same employee and you put them in a place where their personality and their style of work and things like that are the same, and they're going to be much happier because they're working around people who understand how, the level of efficiency. Some companies want you to be incredibly efficient, and they invest, hundreds and thousands of dollars on culture, where they say, okay, what do we need to do here to really pull people up and make them the most efficient version of themselves and enjoy their job, because we recognize that happy employees are more efficient. Now, those are fewer and far between, but on the other hand, companies that go, we're not worried about culture. We're just going to put you down to the grindstone. Well, somebody might say, oh, that's a terrible place to work. Well, some people actually like that kind of a job. I don't know many, but you have to decide that for yourself. And that goes back to that question I asked at the very beginning, is what's your motivation? Because if your motivation is you just want to go in, put your head down, get your work done, work 9 to 5, and then leave and do the technical job you're good at, then that's the job you need to be interviewing for and looking for and talking to people about. Because if you go in and say, oh yeah, I want to be, I'm a team player and I really, like doing things with people, and I want to be a part of the culture of it, but you really just want to go home at the end of the day, then there are going to be mixed signals there. And that goes the reverse too. If you have a company that says, we don't care, you just come in, get your job done, but then they have a happy hour and they want you there and it's kind of a mandatory thing, then you're going to feel very uncomfortable, and you're not going to enjoy your job as much. And so when I look at job hunting or jobs in general, I think that culture is at least 50% of the workplace, because that's where you're spending a huge amount of your time. And that even goes with remote. I've worked remote for many, many, many years before, actually back since the 90s, I've done some version of remote work. So I'm very comfortable with remote work. But for people who have never done it, it's a totally new process. And there's a learning curve there to, how do I get on the Zoom event? How do I make things happen? And I think that's one thing that COVID has really changed, is the way that we communicate with each other in the remote perspective. And so that's something else now as an employer or an employee you're going to have to be thinking of, is how do we interact with each other and have our water cooler time, or our culture. How do we describe that culture if we're all working remote? And that can be a question like, how many times do you have to be on a Zoom event? Do you have to be dressed up for your Zoom event? Are pajamas okay? Or, do we do the new version? Somebody gave me a name for it. I wish I could remember it, but it was it's a mullet, where you wear the top part, a clothing mullet, where you wear the top part as a business outfit, and then you have your shorts or jammies on the bottom half. So, these kind of things, even though they don't really seem important in the interview process, really can change your motivation. Because if you want to wear, if you want to work remote, or you want to wear something more casual, that might be a different company. Or if you're an employer who's looking for somebody who dresses more professionally, then you're going to have to look at those fits. Okay. So those are kind of the questions you want to ask yourself as you're going through your day and trying to find interviews to do. Because I think even though it may take longer and it may be a little more effort, if you think in the long run how much time and money it could potentially save you, then at least you're going into it a little more prepared and ready. And so that's kind of where that is. The other thing I like to talk a lot about, and I think this is a really big topic of discussion right now, is critical thinking skills. So everybody has a little bit different perspective of what critical thinking skills, but the way I like to try to describe it is it's the ability to, it's the ability to look at the broader picture and come up with solutions and think about things in a way that leave you open to all the options. A lot of times we have what's called binary thinking, which is where it's either right or wrong. Okay, so if you're thinking binarily, it's going to be, well, that person's wrong because they didn't do the paperwork the correct way. And that's different than critical thinking, which would be, okay, that person didn't do the work the correct way. Let's see if we can figure out either if that person can do it or can't. Is there something that's getting in the way? Feel how critical thinking takes a little more time, but it's not so black and white. There's that big gray area in between. And I think that's something when you're interviewing that's really good to add into it, because you're not making black and white decisions. You're making the broader decisions that have to do with, okay, do I want to be able to think there's this job that looks good, I just want to apply and get it so that I get a job, I make money, and I'm on my way? which means that I might decide 6 months from now I hate my job, or if it's an employer, I picked the wrong person 3 out of 4, and I'm going to have to go back. So, really, are you saving more time by taking that time, or are you making more work for yourself? And those are questions really only you can answer, because like I said, some people are very happy to just go in and find the job, sit down and do it. And so these things I'm talking about today are really more to give you a broader thing to look at, so that you can say to yourself, okay, what's my motivation? Where do I want to go with it as an employer or an employee? Okay. So critical thinking skills, the way that I teach critical thinking skills is that there's 3 parts to it in my picture of it. One is, first of all, you have to know who you are as a person, because with critical thinking skills, if you're just all over the place, it's very hard to nail it down and say, okay, I can be open to all of this, because you're not even really sure who you are. And what I really ask people to do is basically pick three words that are behavioral adjectives that describe who you want to be as a person. Do you want to be friendly? Do you want to be helpful? Pick your words. Normally I work with people who pick, affirming words as opposed to fracturing words, but, some people, grumpy works for them, some people, can pull off some of those things. So think of, who you want to be as a person. And that's going to be a little bit of a navigation tool for you when you go into a company, because you can say, okay, explain to me what words you would use to describe your company, or what words you would use to describe my boss that I would be having if I were doing this. Or for an employer, you could say, describe words that you think that who you are as a person, or what kind of an environment would you like to work in? Describe these behavioral words, and these have to be words that are actionable. It can't be words like happy, because you can't really control happy. You can control whether you're friendly. You can control whether you're efficient, depending on how well you are doing things in a timely manner, things like that. And then making sure that your definition of those words matches friendly. So if I say I'm a friendly person, and my picture of friendly is very different than somebody else's, then imagine what that's going to look like in an interview process or in a job. So you're going to be thinking, okay, if my word's friendly and this person says they're friendly, but their behaviors aren't really saying that to me, then that kind of is a red flag for you, that maybe you want to kind of look a little bit deeper into those behavioral aspects that are making up about 50% of the job you're getting ready to either find somebody for or to move into. So that's one. And then the second one, and this is a really big one, because this is where I find that most companies seem to struggle, and most people seem to struggle whenever they are looking for a job or when they're in a job. And that is words and actions matching. If you want to talk about authenticity and building trust, what I have found over the past 20 some years is that if your words and actions match, then that's going to change the entire dynamic, because it's going to build authenticity and trust. And the way you can see that is, like, for instance, in a person, if they say, hey, this is a friendly company, everybody gets along, and then you're walking down the hall and you see people who are, looking unhappy, or, there's a heavy feeling in the air, then there's obviously a fracture there in what they're saying and what they're doing. And the same thing with an employee. If you're looking for an employee and they say, yeah, I'm a really efficient person, but then they're late for their interview and they can't seem to pull their resume together for you, then, you're seeing some discrepancies in that. And that's going to be like a little red flag that says, well, maybe there's, those actions are going to be the real true nature of what I'm getting ready to sign up for, one way or the other. And so, really kind of thinking in terms of, what do you want, what do you want that to look like for yourself? Do you want to work in a place where people, where it's valuable to talk to people? I know there are some companies that I've talked with employees where they do like on Friday afternoon, they open up ciders and beers and play board games. And that works for some people, so you can even ask the question, what do y'all do for your culture? What's your culture thing? And so actually Matt Seifer, who I follow him on LinkedIn, he had two really good ones that I really liked that I thought were very good to add to this. He says one of the questions he thinks is very valuable is, what does the company value? That's a really good question for employees to ask employers, but I think you could also switch it around and say, what do you value? What's valuable to you? Because then you have a picture of whether the person finds a 9-to-5 job valuable or their family is valuable, and that kind of gives you a little bit of a feel for that core part of them. And the other one is understanding the who and the how of the company. So who the company is like, what they're doing, what the physical aspects, the technical, and the how is the more cultural aspects. How do you run your company? Is there a direct chain of command, or is it more loosey-goosey, everybody works together? Because some people really like it whenever they know who their boss is and they can know that direct chain of command to get the answers they need, especially like in project management or product management, things like that. Other times you've got a smaller group of people who are working more in a team effort where everybody kind of works together. And so those are some questions to ask, because if you're an employee looking for a job and you're a person who likes to have a lot of interaction with people and be very creative, then you're able to do that. And then the last part of the critical thinking, we've had the personal mission, which is your behavioral words and actions. And then the third one is your don't judge things as good or bad or wrong or right. Now, the reason I find this to be a really good way to look at things is when you're going through the interview process, sometimes you might look at something and go, oh, that's wrong, or oh, that's bad. And then you start putting values on people and things that may or may not be true. So to give you an example, if I say, I gave you one earlier, another one would be if you're working with somebody and they say, oh yeah, I'm really bad at this, or I'm really good at this, then sometimes you're not going to know if that's a truth or if it's what that means to that person, because good for one person may mean something very different than good for another person. And so one of the best examples I have of that was there was two people that were getting their work done on time. And one of the boss was really upset because, or one of the employees was really upset because they were like, well, I'm always getting my work on time. It's always in, an hour before it's supposed to be, and it's always done, just the way it's supposed to be. And the leader or the manager was like, well, yeah, that's good, but Bob's doing okay too. Yeah, not real name. And so what was happening was that Bob was getting his paperwork in like right at the last minute. And so if you're looking for an employee that is efficient in the way that you think they should be efficient, but they're not in the way they are, then you're kind of getting into that little gray area once again. And that has to do with that critical thinking, because if you're thinking binarily, you're going to say, oh, that person, they're not a good fit. We don't even want them here. We're moving on. If you're thinking critically, then you delve into it a little bit and you say, okay, it's not good or bad or wrong or right. It's just different. And I want to see if that person could fit into this situation. And so then you can give them a scenario and say, all right, here's a situation that we are having here at the office. How would you handle that? And then you can see a little bit more about where they are. And it may be they're a perfect fit, or maybe they're not. But it gives you that opportunity to look a little broader. And if you think about looking at something binarily, good, bad, wrong, or right, it's black or white. Think about how many missed opportunities as an employee or an employer you might miss or not have, because you didn't look at it from a little bit bigger perspective of what the company is, where, where are they going, things like that. And this also helps you to kind of keep yourself centered if you're an employee, because it's very stressful. And I think it's on both sides, but I think especially for an employee who needs a job, or is really, really in need of finding something that's going to fulfill them, is that they really need to understand how to fit themselves into something so that they can better feel like they're a part of it. Because if your employees or employers feel like they're a part of something, they're going to be more effective at it. And if they can look at it from that broader perspective, then they might find that little place within the company that's going to work for them. So that's kind of in a nutshell what I talk about. And I've got some other things I can talk about, but does anybody have any questions? I don't want to, I tend to be bad about talking and then leaving like 3 minutes to ask questions. So I'm going to take a quick break and see if anybody has any questions, and then I can finish up afterwards if anybody didn't have any questions.
Lynette, I have a question. This is Kathy.
Hey.
I plugged into your LinkedIn profile, and I was following along with your presentation there, and putting some things in the chat box so people could see them.
Oh, great.
But
Okay. Yeah.
but at the very end, you said, okay, there are three things. Number one, personalize your personal mission. Number two, words and actions must match. And what was the concise way to say number three?
Yeah, the third one was don't judge things or people as good or bad or wrong or right.
Okay.
Because you're limiting yourself. I mean, think about it. If you go, oh, he's bad, he's good. He's bad, he's good. You have no idea, if you don't ask all those other questions, what you're missing. In fact, the analogy I use a lot is the Grand Canyon theory. That's what I call it. And so my example is, if you are looking out over the Grand Canyon and you have two people that are standing in the exact same little lookout site, and you hand each of them a camera and they take a picture. Well, you're going to have two totally different pictures, but they're going to be similar in some ways, but you can look at those two pictures and you can either say, oh, mine's good and yours is bad. Or you can say, wow, they're different. Here's where they're the same. Here's things I like about them. Here's the things I don't like about them. And, you're kind of maybe wondering, well, why the heck is she talking about this during an interview process discussion? But I mean, just for a minute, think about the motivation and the way and the perspective you're going to be going into that interview situation if you're having this broader, bigger, words and actions, all those things. Think about how that just dynamically is going to change everything you do in that interview process, and how you feel about yourself, whether you're an interviewer or an interviewee. So
I always like to teach classes during a presidential campaign, because it's exactly the same. You have these candidates who are looking for a job, and we, the people, are the employers. And so all of those things, do these two candidates have a personal mission? Is that mission aligned with the mission of we, the people? And then the other one that you had was words and actions must match. So you look at these candidates, and do their words and their actions match? Do they
exactly
they add up? And then the third one too is, don't judge people as good or bad, right or wrong. And we are so polarized in our country now that that's all we do. We immediately say that candidate is evil, and this candidate is good, and we don't allow for the gray area.
Exactly. What do we agree on? What can we find value in together that's going to strengthen things instead of fracture things?
Yeah, exactly. This campaign especially, because we're so polarized, that it really works in perfectly with your thesis.
Yeah, actually, there was a really good graph. I'll see if I can find it and send it to you, but it was talking about the United States. It used to be that people, the voting population, there was a huge number of kind of the moderates, and then there were a lot of people on the far one side and the far other side. And so there was a huge place of moderation in the middle. And now in the most recent study, it's almost a 50-50 split of one side or the other. And I find that very interesting, although I have no research on it. So if anybody's heard anything on this, I'd love to hear about it, is that we are becoming a society of more binary thinking, which is like good, bad, wrong, right, ones and zeros, which is ironically an increase in our technical, the computers and, their ones and zeros in binary thinking. And so, it makes me wonder sometimes if we're kind of being pulled along by the binary thinking of the systems, and how do we integrate the wonderful things that technology can bring us without losing that critical thinking skill? Because it actually is, they're finding that, and universities are actually very concerned about students that are coming in who do not have these critical thinking skills. And a lot of companies are actually saying it's one of the #1 things that they're searching for. Because imagine if you're in HR and you want to hire somebody who is able to really broadly look at something, and say, okay, it's not going to be just this one thing or this thing, it's going to be all these possibilities. And, this also falls into whole discussions about innovation, diversity and inclusion. I mean, think about it from the perspective of diversity and inclusion. If nobody is really good, bad, wrong, or right when it comes to that value system, then, it doesn't matter what nationality you are, what ethnic race you are, male, female, all that stuff kind of takes a back seat if you've got those critical thinking skills in place, because you're not thinking from the perspective of, oh, that person's bad or wrong or different. You're thinking, okay, what does this person bring to the table? What are the things that we can integrate into our system of working, and what things are going to be a hindrance to that? Exactly. And so that'll tell you a lot about a company. That goes back to that words and actions thing. You can tell a lot about a company from whether their words and actions match. And but I asked the question, and I've almost had 100% with this, is if I ask the question, which has more value as far as telling somebody who you are as a person, your words or your actions? What do you think the one that's most said is?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Actions. Yeah, your actions.
Actions, of course.
Yeah. So when somebody comes to me and says, well, Judy said that, she was going to do this and I'm really mad at her and she's wrong, then, you can say, well, I appreciate you're upset about that. And you may have a right to be upset about that, but let's look at it from this perspective of Judy's not wrong. She had a different perspective, and we need to figure out what happened there to make sure that we can fix it or utilize, her skills the way they are. And that's a much different story than just, oh, we're getting rid of her, or she's bad. In fact, we've had situations where a person was on their last chance of getting fired from their job, and they learned the system of the 3, and they started integrated it into the way that they worked with people. Totally changed. They ended up staying and being one of the lead people for the company. And so it really can make a huge difference. And so when you're thinking about an interview as a precursor to your job, you want to make sure that whoever you're hiring or wherever you're going has a really good, you have a really good picture of that 50% that's going to make a real big difference in your day-to-day life. Yeah. So
that's recently there have been lots and lots of companies that have issued statements on their website and so forth about inclusion. We
Yes.
believe in diversity and inclusion. And some of them are companies that I know, like there was a prominent real estate company, and I know that company redlined people and would steer minorities to certain parts of town and would not enable them to integrate neighborhoods. And yet now their words are that we completely believe in this and
right. and you can, and so my big advice would be is if they say something to you, if you're in an interview or you're interviewing somebody and they say something to you and it doesn't match what they're doing or what you're seeing, I would say go with what you're seeing or what they're doing as the way that you're going to judge that, whether it's a good fit for you, than their words, because it's very easy to say things and then not, really follow them because you're just saying them so that maybe somebody will take the job or so that they'll hire you or things like that. And like I said, that goes back into that cycle of what's your motivation. If your motivation is to just get a job and get paid and go into work, then, that's where you're going to be. And if you like that, then you found the right place. But if you're searching for something a little more, or if culture is important to you, or if you want to enjoy your work, then those are the types of fulfillment things that you'll have to kind of expand. And then if you also learn it, it helps you once you get into your job, because part of this whole process is not just interviewing and getting the job, but keeping it for a while, where you're not going, oh my gosh, I hate this job, I'm leaving in a year, so, which happens a lot. I've heard that a number of times. So,
Well, and back to politics again too, where people go into politics very often with very high ideals, highly
yeah.
principled,
Hmm.
and ready to perhaps negotiate or compromise, and that's kind of how the way politics has always worked. And
Hmm.
then these days they change. They go
Yeah.
in and they have to play the game in a very different way. But
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah, it's a real challenge because if you're in a society where there's a certain system in place and you can't navigate your way through that, especially if you're talking about a big corporation or a political thing, how do you change a big machine that's already going a different direction, or can you, those are the questions you have to ask yourself and everybody's got a different answer. That's why it's a real challenge when you're interviewing or doing those types of things, is there's not a one size fits all where you can say that's going to work for everybody. It's got to be I'm going to take these little skills of, words and actions and not judging people and having my own personal mission and trying to navigate my way through that, or take that as a HR person even and say, how am I going to help get this person in a job they really like, but also fill these jobs so that 6 months, a year from now, I'm not having to refill them because I'm one of those 3 out of 4 that weren't a good fit, so.
yeah, people are making good comments. Darren said nuance is fast becoming a lost art.
Yeah, yeah.
And and that's true. And then Walter said hiring managers have binary thinking. You either have the skills as they are listed in the job posting, or you're out. And very often they're
Yeah.
narrow-minded in terms of, do you have other skills that are complementary, or perhaps completely different, but would enable you to do the job in a slightly
Eh,
different
yeah,
different way.
exactly. Yeah. And you may have to take a job like that. That's one of the things I've seen a number of times, is somebody really needs a job. So they take whatever job they can find so that they're making the money. But, you don't just take the job and say, okay, that's it, I'm just going to live in this job forever. You say, okay, I'm going to take this job and I'm going to come up with a plan. And my plan is I'm not going to judge anybody, because I took this job knowing full well it wasn't going to be the job that was my dream job. And I'm going to make a plan for how I'm going to get where I am right now to where I want to be. Because that's a whole other topic of discussion, is, how do you, as an employee or an employer, kind of make that plan for how you're going to keep and retain people. So, but the process of the 3 always remains the same. That's the one thing I have found that, oh, pardon me, I'm sorry. That's the one thing I found that really seems to hold true for pretty much anybody. So that's, kind of where I start with people.
Anybody else have a question? Let's see. Herschel says, how do you deal with situations where we find the reality of the company's tolerance for diversity and inclusion a few months after joining it? So obviously they've joined it because they've talked a good game, and then the reality
Yeah, yeah,
of their
yeah.
tolerance for diversity is
Yeah.
diminished. It's
Yeah,
different.
what I would say is, a lot of times when we think diversity, we think just in terms of ethnic diversity, but or male, female. But what I'm really finding is in our society, we have so many different ways to be diverse. It's not just the mainstream ones that we used to have. And so, it's even diversity of how you think. If you think about people, some companies, if you have an opinion about anything, you're just shut down and said, don't have that opinion. So you could even say there's diversity in whether or not you have critical thinking skills or not. You know what I mean? And so I think the challenge is, and this goes back to that whole part of how do you connect to yourself, to other people in the world. The challenge is asking yourself the question, having a self-awareness, whether you're the employer or the employee, of what do I want this to look like? Because if you're not doing it from the beginning to get to where you want to be at the end, you're just kind of all over the place. It's all loosey-goosey. So if it's a diversity issue, you have to ask yourself the question, is this a company I really want to work for? If it is, and they're having diversity issues for whatever cause, is there a way I can change it? And if not, how far am I willing to go? Am I willing to, sue somebody over it? What statement about who I want to be as a person do I want to do with this? And I do like to practice though, that violence to me, anytime we got the riots, and I know I'm walking on a thin line here, but when you're talking about those types of things, how are they bringing value or strengthening something? You know what I'm saying? Because even, one of my favorite people that I read a little bit about is Martin Luther King, and his way of doing things was very nonviolent, very, we're going to go and make a stand, and we're going to make it strong, and we're going to make our voices heard. But there wasn't rioting and violence and things like that. And I mean, that's a perfect example of changing the world in some ways. And, granted, we've got a lot of way to go, but there's a lot of different ways of viewing things. If you're in poverty, it's really hard for somebody who's a middle class, Caucasian person to really understand the struggles and the challenges that somebody who's African American in the projects is coming from. It's a different story that they have. And so they're going to have to think, okay, even if you're in the projects, I used to do a little work in Montgomery, Alabama, in their projects. And it was actually, I hate to say it, was probably one of my, not hate to say it, but it's probably one of my favorite jobs. That was years and years ago, but the people were so nice to me. I was the only Caucasian person in the whole building, and the people were just so kind to me, and I have had such good experiences, even though there were like shootings every day in the place. So I think you just have to find your way through that using those three things. How am I going to make myself a strong person by following this behavior that I've chosen as my descriptor for who I want to be as a person? How do I make my words and actions match? And how do I not judge other people and just kind of keep myself on that line? And think just saying that, think about how that makes you feel as far as going into a job interview. Is that much more calm and make you feel more confident? Or, oh my gosh, I'm just going to go into this and hope for the best? Which way is going to help kind of navigate you where you want to go?
Let's see, in the chat bar, the person who said the company's tolerance for diversity and inclusion a few months after joining it, then he said, true, I meant diversity of thought and opinion and approach to work.
Yeah, yeah. That's another, it's the same thing. And some companies may not want to change. And I think that's the hard thing, is if you really love your job, but your company will not change culture-wise, you have to make the decision. Do I value culture enough, or do I want to try to implement change in it to make that happen? And I've seen people where they changed the environment of their team just by how they act. Because think about somebody you've had on your team whose words are friendly, helpful, efficient, pick whatever words, and they live that out every day. They're pretty, all of those things all day long. If you come to them for a problem or anything, you can feel already it's building the trust and making people feel more authentic to you. And then all the other people who maybe aren't doing that, at least they're not bringing that person and adding to the chaos. Okay. So the way I usually do it, I'll bring my hands up so you can see if this is a calm person who's following their words and actions, and they're doing the no value judgment. They're just getting, they're doing what they need to do. And then you have this person who's all over the place. Well, if I have a person that's all over the place and somebody who's calm, look how much calmer that looks than this. So you're changing the entire dynamic of your team just by staying calm and staying on your line of these are my words, these are the things. And that can bode well for an interview, because if you're an employee and you can say, look, here's my words and this is how I want to do it. These are going to be my actions. And keep on that. That's the plan.
Oh, I don't know that this is let's see, we've got two more questions, but they're a little bit hard for you to answer perhaps. How do you integrate coworkers who have untreated communication disorders, speech pathology, receptive language disorders?
Okay. Do you mean like?
How do you start a dialogue on those speech issues?
So it would depend on the speech issue. There are some that are very significant. You can have something like a lisp, or if they're a radio announcer, I don't know. Barbara Walters seemed to do okay with it, but some people it may be a problem for them. Or if it's something where they have a larger communication issue. Once again, you have to say that's where those critical thinking skills come in again, is you have to look at that broader picture and say, okay, here's the person, here's how we want to fit them in, have a clear picture and a clear path for how you're going to do that. And then have if your words are kind and friendly, have a kind and friendly discussion where your words and actions match and you're, being honest with them. One of the things that I do hear a lot is people they want to avoid hurting anybody's feelings or, firing somebody, something like that. And, to me, when I look at that, I think the kindest things sometimes you can do is be honest and, keep those words and actions matching. Because if you have a communication disorder, you don't want somebody who's going to criticize you and say, oh, you're, good, bad, wrong, or right. You want somebody who's going to say, hey, I've noticed this and I'm concerned. I want to figure out a way we can integrate this into this. And I have a clear plan. What do you think? And work with them. Because, even though it may sting a little bit, I think most people feel much better whenever they've been treated with those words and actions matching. I mean, think about it from your own perspective. If you've had a job where your boss tells you one thing and then does something different, how does that make you feel versus your boss who says, look, I can't change it. It's a big, ugly machine and you're just going to have to do it. That's, even though you don't want to hear that, that's a much nicer thing to hear from your boss. And yeah, we'll get it done. Don't worry about it. And then the next day, nothing happens and it doesn't happen. And it doesn't happen.
No, you're right. Those are those crucial conversations.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last one says, I noticed, this is from that same person, I noticed that when I use plain English dictionary words, the words are redefined with other meanings by the other person. So they're misinterpreted.
Yes, yeah.
So it's been frustrating for that person.
Yeah, that's one thing that I really do emphasize whenever I say pick your words. If you'll notice earlier in the conversation, I actually said something about, I said, make sure that your word has the same meaning as other people's. Because if you say, like, for instance, if I say I'm friendly, and friendly to me is talking a lot to somebody and really kind of getting in their face and, hey, how's it going? And moving my hands around a lot, that may intimidate some people. And they may think that friendly is, hi, standing back a little bit, how are you today? And so, you can see already the feeling, even in a video chat, if I'm talking to you in my video like this, and I'm, my hands are up in my face and all, that's a different visual than sitting back a little bit, relaxed, casual. And especially with body language being, probably what is it, 70, I can't, it's been a while since I've done that, but so I think it's like 70 or 80% of the, of your language is body language. And so, so when you're doing an audio, that's why the question you have to ask yourself if you're doing a remote interview is phone or Zoom. Well, maybe Zoom, because then you can see their face, you can see their gestures, how they present themselves on a video chat, things like that. So those things can make a difference in whether you want to hire someone or something.